Welcome everybody to Carpool Q&A. I'm here with Pastor Tom. We've just wrapped up the second service at our Gold Coast church plant, Hope Reformed Baptist Church, Gold Coast. And now we're driving up the road to Logan for Tom to preach up there. This Q&A is going to be covering all things church planting, all things related to church, ecclesiology, missiology, mission. So send in your questions in the comments and we'll be covering all the questions. So first question for you, Pastor Tom. When should a church decide to plant a new church?
Oh, wow. Good question. Yeah, starting easy, I guess, with the question. A church should definitely decide as early on as possible, or an eldership, because I guess not every church is starting from scratch.
Yep.
But an eldership should decide as early on as possible that it will be planting churches. That should be something that should be a part of a church's ministry philosophy or missiology from the very get-go, is that if we believe in the Great Commission, then more churches need to be planted. If we believe that Christ builds his kingdom through his church, through the proclamation of the gospel, then that requires churches to be established. So if you're a part of that, if you're a faithful part of that, you will be in some measure responsible for church planting. So you should decide as early on as possible that you will be planting churches. I don't think that is an option to be a faithful New Testament church. But when that actually takes place, is maybe the answer is that it's okay to be a completely different answer for every single different church, because different people have different capacities, different skills. Paul definitely was willing to take the providence of God in somewhere like Philippia and Thessalonica and move just a couple of weeks or months after establishing the church. He would move away because the providence of God in his persecution and in the political climate of the city made it impossible for him to stay, so he went on to plant another one. Now, he was an apostle. He was Paul. There's lots of things we can say that is very specific to him, but at least we can't say that's unbiblical. If a missionary goes into a town, establishes Christians, establishes a church, and 3 months later persecution pushes him out and he has to leave the indigenous Christians there, that's not a failure on his part. That's at least what happened to Paul. So that's probably the as quick as you ever want to be kind of style. I would at least say you probably need less of all the ducks in a row as people think, because we don't want to do a tidy, forced church split where we plan a year out to send a third of our resources, a third of our people, a third of our eldership, a third of our budget down to a different location and call it a church plant. That's not really a plant because it hasn't started with a seed and then grown. Rather, it's just chopping off a few branches from one tree and shoving it in the ground somewhere else. I think doing that is it's very safe because it's hard to fail. But no matter what, you'll have 30 people who rock up every week. You'll have enough money, you'll have enough givers, you'll have enough servers. Whereas I think New Testament ministry would be that one guy who can preach and one deacon can just decide we have what it takes to go down and start preaching the gospel so that we evangelize a church into existence. And if other people from other churches or our sending church want to join in and help be a part of that as part of their mission work, then all power to them. They can absolutely do that. But yeah, a church should try and do it definitely as soon as possible, and with removing as many idealist things as possible, because otherwise it'll just never get done. Because I don't think a church will ever feel like they're totally stable enough to plant and send and not lose anything by doing that.
Sweet. Question 2. Why aren't we starting in a home and doing a home church and letting it grow organically? Why hire out a building?
One of my favorite questions. I was actually chatting to another guy from another state, a pastor, about that this week. He was just sort of picking my brain and talking about church planting stuff. There's definitely nothing sinful about meeting in houses. As a church, we do that with our Bible studies and our fellowship groups. There's definitely, and this needs to be said, there's definitely nothing more holy or more New Testament about meeting in a house than in a rented building. Definitely not. I mean, the very first instance that we have of public gatherings is in the big sort of rented colonnades of the temple. So large public areas like a conference room type thing would be the modern day equivalent. So churches were gathering wherever they could all fit. Historically, house churches have been a handy model where there's been persecution because they're hard, obviously you can't build a church building and it's harder to find those Christians. It's also able to change location every week, or where there is extremely limited resources and it's just not an option from the beginning to be renting a building. That would be a waste of money. However, I don't think that in our Western context, starting a house church is really at all the most missional thing. In other words, to start in a house simply because you don't want to start in a building, like it feels more spiritual, and that's almost always the reason why people do it. I mean, you can rent a building for $30, an hour. There's no way you don't have $60 in the budget. If you don't have $60, then you're not trusting God enough, or you shouldn't be planning a church. If you've got at least $60, you can rent a public room, and then you've got the ability to publicly advertise it and say, hey guys, come along, community, come along, and it's neutral ground, so people can come and they don't feel like they're walking into people's homes. I think that would be a lower level of commitment to be able to just come to a building room and walk on in. Would be less confronting to a non-Christian or a non-church person than having to come to a person's private residence and walk in and say, hey, I saw the invite, or you staying on the road, Sam?
Yep, on the road.
I got those markers there for a reason. So why not in a house? Because there's no benefit to doing it in a house. Do we have anything against doing it in a house? Well, not really, but yeah, kind of, because it's not as accessible to people, and I'm always praying and expecting that God's going to bring to us just random people off the street, people who aren't connected to anybody else, right? People who just found us online, and that has, I can say, since I started pastoring back in August 2019, since that day, except for some of our COVID weekends when, it's all very quiet and locked down, there has been a visiting person every single service since August 2019 as an answer to prayer from God. There's never been a single service that I remember that I've been able to look around and go, I've seen everybody here before. Yep. So that's something I think is really important, especially for a church plant, is you want to be able to just have the cleaner walking past the room and go, hey, a song, and walk on in and then hear the gospel and be saved. I want to just leave us as open as possible to the providence of God. And it's not to say that you can't be blessed in a house. And of course, you've got other people who are closer to, your own family members and all that, who are very welcome, who may feel very welcome in a setting like a house church. But I think even more so to the broader general public is if it's in a public setting.
Yeah, very good points. Okay, question 3. Why are you, Pastor Tom, the elder of Logan Hope Reformed Baptist Church, preaching at Gold Coast Hope Reformed Baptist Church? If it's a new church, shouldn't it have new eldership?
Good stuff. So stay on the road, mate.
On the road, it's all good.
We're going to die. So I am preaching elder at Hope Reformed Baptist Church Logan in a team of elders with Vic and Keith. And we are, all three of us, elders over the outreach into the Gold Coast, which is our church plant. So we all three remain elders over this venture because it is not its own independent church yet. So that is an option that you could do. I don't think it would be ideally biblical to be in a functional elder over 2 independent churches. I wouldn't believe in that. So I wouldn't want to be sent to the Gold Coast to be the elder of Hope Reformed Baptist Church Logan with its own membership and constitution. They voted me in to be an elder and then also be an elder in another church. I don't believe that's a biblical model.
Yeah.
However, at this point, there is not a critical mass of people at Gold Coast yet to have a membership. We believe, especially as Reformed Baptists, this would even come back to our confession, but we would believe that elders need to be called by the people they are going to shepherd. And to do that, you first need a membership. So to become an independent local church, you need members that agree on a constitution, and then those members, in the very first members meeting they ever have, they appoint for themselves an elder. Ideally, a plurality of elders, so 2 or 3 elders, because that's what we see everywhere in the New Testament, is that there is always a multiplicity of elders, not just a single person. So at the moment, what we have is we're in a church plant phase. It's not an independent church. It doesn't have its own membership. It doesn't have its own eldership. I'm not a single elder on the Gold Coast, but Vic and Keith have both been involved in the planning. Keith was here last week. He wasn't here this week. Vic will be here in different weeks. I will continue to carry out my God-given role and gifting, which is teaching. That will continue to be my main thing. So I'll be preaching at both, but the Gold Coast Church plant, in its planting phase, still finds itself underneath the umbrella of eldership of Hope Reformed Baptist Church.
Yeah.
So when it becomes independent, we will aim, to have distinct elders. Who those are yet, we don't know. Because God willing, my plan is to stay at Logan, and we'll raise up new people for Gold Coast. Other people will come to the church. People will be raised up in the church. Maybe somebody is sent from Hope Church down there, but at the moment we're just, who knows what a year can bring. So we're praying for that at about the 12-month mark to be able to make it independent. But a lot can happen in 12 months. We'll see what God does.
Awesome. That kind of leads straight into the next question. So, church planting models. Yep. Which church planting models do you advocate, and what situations would they be appropriate? And on the contrary, are there unbiblical church models that you see are common?
If there are official entitled models out there, I don't know what they are. I've never read a book on church planting, so I don't know if there's a particular type or style you want me to talk to. If so, jump in and say, there's some. I guess there's I can just really speak anecdotally. So from what I've seen other people do, or other pastors do, other friends do, I think there's the traveling missionary, almost apostolic type church planning. I'm not saying they're apostles, but doing what the apostles did, which was like move into a place, preach until there's people saved, set up elders and go. That is a biblical form of church planning, because we see the apostles do it. And we see that happen all over the world. One of the risks that brings up is heresy is able to come in quickly, because you've got people who are recently saved. If it's an unchurched area, you get people saved and then you move on 6 months later. The most mature Christian there is a 6-month-old Christian. Even that is not the end of the world. Paul would just go back and visit them and write to them again. And we've got the inspired canon, so that takes a lot of faith. But that's a fair ground, a fair model. I wouldn't really try for that in our modern context, because I think there's ways to be much more effective. I don't need to leave a city to be effective elsewhere, right? So I can continue to do all of my ministry at Hope Reformed Baptist while also planting down here. I don't need to up and leave. So contextually not what I'm going to do, but that's a fair model. Other models would be more lifetime missionary models, and this would probably especially be cross-cultural, when you move somewhere and just become a missionary, incarnate into the people, learn their language, dress like them, eat like them, live like them, and as long as it takes, you just stay there until people get evangelized, a church starts, and then you die there. So if the church thrives and explodes, you stay there and continue to oversee it. If it struggles and it's like 2 or 3 people after 20 years, you just keep on going. That would also be a biblical model. Probably the unbiblical model I would not be keen on, which is what came up before, was more along the lines of fail-safe tree planting. So that instead of planting a seed of the gospel through the gospel being preached, so that a church grows up out of that seed, rather splitting a tree in half and taking 30 people down to a certain area and starting a new church. Like, that's cool. Like, there's nothing against, I don't think there's any laws against splitting a church. I just don't see how that's a mission move. And usually it gets runs on the board by being able to say, we planted a church. Well, really, you just made one of your church services smaller, and and people are just meeting in a different location. Now, that's okay if what they're planning is, but that's to start us off, and then we plan to grow from people from the outside in that new area. Yeah, but I don't like that as a model, as in, that's not what we've done, not what we want to do. This would not be our model, because it immediately removes the intensity of the mission and the urgency. As soon as you walk into a building and there's, more than 10 people, as a churchgoer, or maybe you're on the church plant team or whatever, or you're the pastor, you can be tempted to feel like, oh good, we're not failing. There's enough people here that if I go and, if I put a photo of us up on Instagram, it won't be embarrassing, right? The temptation is always to get idle and to feel satisfied because there's not an embarrassingly low amount of people here, and to then not strive urgently to see more people saved. Whereas if we went to a new city, right, 2 hours drive away, and we sent an elder and a deacon, right, church planning team going to Byron.
2 guys.
Or going to, Sunshine Coast. No one's going to be ducking up there, from Hope. In between Sundays, they're just going. They're going out to Whoop Whoop, or they're going out somewhere, fair driveway, and they're moving there. If they do that, and after 2 Sundays, it's still just them and their families in the building, they're going to have the very present, urgent pressure on themselves by just being in the room to feel like, oh man, we need to get active, because we don't just want to keep on hanging out together every Sunday. We want to see this thing grow. So, I would want to avoid church planning models that mitigate failure and that bubble wrap the whole process. There's some processes that you get so much money from the planting organization, you get so much support from your sending church that no matter what happens, you'll have what you need. You'll have the pastor will have his salary looked out for. And this is a lot of stuff that maybe in the Reformed world we don't like talking about, pragmatic stuff or money or spreadsheets, but the reality is, if somebody feels called to plant a church and after 3 years the church is still just him and his family, he's not merited the church's resources. He shouldn't, he doesn't have the competency or the skills to be taking resources from the church to grow anything, because he's not able to grow from it. And that's how Jesus works. He says, I give you talents, I expect investment. And so sometimes we get a bit uncomfortable at that, because that doesn't feel very grace-based. But a lot of the Christian life is in fact merit-based. It's just that our right standing with God is not merit-based on ours, right? In terms of our merit. And sometimes, and the pastor really has to think, is the amount that we're spending, is the amount that we're doing, is the amount of hours that we're exerting, is that worth the amount of inflow that there is? The amount of money that's coming in? Is this sustainable? Like, sometimes it can feel like a not very faithful thing to ask, but you have to ask about mission sustainability. Unless you're willing to be like Paul and work full time and totally fund yourself and then pay for everybody else with you and look after the church, you have to ask, is this sustainable? So, anything that bubble wraps the process so that the church planter cannot fail no matter what, I don't like that model. I really just want somebody with real leadership to just step out. Whoever wants to help him helps him out. But, it's God ultimately who is his employer. It's God ultimately who has made him an overseer and a preacher. And so that should be evident in the model.
Oh, that is a much better idea. Just something you've said there. You've mentioned sending out an elder with a deacon. Is there a reason you say elder and deacon? Can you just send out an elder, send out 2 elders? Is there an intentionality with that language?
Yeah, well, again, it's pragmatic. It would be what is both biblical and would work. So if you send out 2 elders, you've got 2 people who, according to Scripture, they can both say, it is not given to us, according to Acts 6, it is not given to us to wait tables. I must be taken up in the Word of God and prayer. That's what the apostles said. And that's why they brought forward deacons in the first place in Acts 6. So, okay, but in a church, you need somebody to wait tables. You need somebody to do the admin. You need somebody to set up the chairs. And so, you can go, okay, well, we're just going to be elders who do everything.
Right.
But now you're failing in your job, because part of the elder's job is to keep the main thing, and not get distracted with other good things. And so that's why God gave us the deacon. Yeah, again, you could even ask, why don't we plant with 3 elders and 2 deacons? But again, then you're going, well, you've got half a church there. You've got 5 office bearers with no membership. And in fact, really and technically, he's not an elder until he's voted on the sending church to be a sent elder. And he's not an elder over the people until they, having been gathered under his preaching, then by vote affirm him as their shepherd. So that's what, when we say we send an elder, we mean we send an elder qualified person. Now, maybe they are functionally an elder in Hope. Maybe they're just qualified for it, but we're not going to make them an elder here because we're going to send them. And so they'll be a sent elder or a sent elder qualified person. And then they might be an actual deacon or just a deacon qualified person who will do the role of a deacon. Yeah, so it's functional. But he can focus on the praying, the preaching, the teaching ministry, the Bible studies, the counseling, the dealing with lost souls, and the deacon can deal with all of the practical stuff, and then while also seeking as much as he possibly can to be doing the work of the ministry, the work of the evangelist.
Very good. Okay, last question before we're about 2 minutes from church. What is the vision looking ahead for Hope Reformed Baptist Church Gold Coast, and what are some prayer points for the church plant as we head out?
My vision for Hope is that we would plant 5 churches in 10 years, and that each church that we plant seeks to do the same. So my model, as we've already been discussing, as is evident through Gold Coast, is I will plant a satellite church around Hope Reformed Baptist Church. That is somewhere that I can drive to in between services and start off, and then within 12 months to 2 years, the absolute maximum, but hopefully around the 12-month mark, I can give off to qualified men that we've trained up, so that's now an independent church. And then I can do that again in the next 2-year period, somewhere else, half an hour to 45 minutes away from church. The aim would then be that those other churches do the same. So within their first 2 years, they are reaching out somewhere to send one of their elders to do 2 services a day, planting a satellite church. Once that becomes independent, he stays, or they raise up new people out there. And I think that there is much need for that. You know, we're not big EVA, big institutional, lots of money or big institutions that we're resting on. We're just very grassroots, and that's how we like it. I think that's the key and one of the secrets to the future of the Reformed Church in Australia. And so that's what people can be praying for. Elder qualified men to be raised up and to come to Hope Gold Coast. And then, of course, looking into the future, people who can also plant out from Hope Gold Coast within our first 2 years, so that she can continue on the vision that we have begun on from Hope. And there we have it. We just pulled up.
Amazing.
And we made it.
We did.
You're driving.
We made it.